It was a moment no one expected. A calm, composed woman, known for her quiet strength, facing a rude TV host who seemed determined to push her buttons. The scene was set, the tension was high, and everyone was waiting for something to happen. But what they didn't know was that Melania Trump, the former First Lady of the United States, was about to take control of the situation in a way no one could have imagined. Melania Trump, a woman who had largely stayed out of the spotlight, was suddenly thrust into a confrontation. She was known for her elegance, her quiet demeanor, and the way she carried herself with grace under pressure. Yet that day, in front of millions of viewers, she was forced into a situation where her response would speak volumes. It wasn't just another interview. This was a live television moment that would be seen by millions around the world. The TV host, with a sharp tone and a sarcastic smile, made what many saw as a rude comment. He tried to throw Melania off guard, expecting her to either get defensive or show weakness. He underestimated her. The host's words were loaded with a sense of arrogance, as if he believed he could push her into a corner and catch her off guard. But Melania wasn't just any person. She had faced countless challenges in her life, from being the wife of one of the most controversial presidents in modern history to navigating the public eye and dealing with constant media scrutiny. She had learned how to remain calm in the face of adversity. She had developed a reputation for handling difficult situations with dignity, even when others tried to tear her down. On that day, the interview started like any other. The host, known for his sharp and often critical questioning style, asked Melania a few basic questions. But as the interview went on, his questions took a more pointed turn. He seemed determined to provoke her, perhaps hoping for a dramatic moment that would stir controversy. What the host didn't expect was Melania's calmness. Her body language alone was enough to send a clear message. She sat there, not flustered, but strong and poised. Every word from her seemed calculated, deliberate. She wasn't going to let him rattle her. As the host continued with his remarks, a subtle shift began to occur. The audience could sense it. The tension was rising. Melania had been silently absorbing the host's comments, and viewers were beginning to wonder how long she would keep her composure. It was clear that something was building beneath the surface, something that would eventually break. But what would it be? The clock was ticking, and everyone in the room, as well as the millions watching at home, were on the edge of their seats. The host, perhaps sensing that he had pushed her too far, continued his questioning, trying to get her to respond. But Melania didn't bite. She sat there, her eyes focused, her posture strong. And that's when it happened. In a moment that would change everything, Melania Trump responded. The words that came from her mouth were not only powerful, but delivered in a way that left everyone in the room in absolute shock. The TV host, who had expected her to crumble under pressure, was left speechless. The audience, who had been waiting for some kind of emotional outburst or confrontation, witnessed something completely different. Melania's response wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was so precise and sharp that it cut through the tension like a knife. What was even more surprising was the aftermath. The host, stunned and clearly caught off guard, struggled to regain control of the conversation. Meanwhile, the viewers at home were left with one burning question on their minds. How did Melania do it? How did she manage to shut down a rude TV host with such confidence and grace? The world had just witnessed a side of Melania Trump that no one expected. She had proven, once again, that she wasn't to be underestimated, and what happened next would leave America and the world in complete disbelief. As the interview progressed, it became increasingly clear that the atmosphere was shifting. The host, who had initially started with what seemed like casual questions, began to push harder, testing Melania's patience. It was almost as if he wanted to provoke her, to create some sort of dramatic exchange for the cameras. The audience could feel the change in the air. The tension was building, slowly but surely. The host, known for his sharp tongue and bold questions, started to get more personal. He didn't seem interested in asking the usual political questions. Instead, he wanted to dig deeper, challenge Melania on her personal life, and provoke a reaction. He asked pointed, sometimes uncomfortable questions, ones that seemed designed to put her on the defensive. At one point, he even made a sarcastic remark, suggesting that Melania had been too quiet and questioning her role during her husband's presidency. It was a subtle jab, but one that could have easily rattled someone less prepared for the spotlight. The host was trying to get her to respond emotionally, to snap back in frustration, but Melania remained composed. She didn't show any sign of being thrown off. She simply listened, her face giving nothing away, her posture still calm and dignified. The audience watching at home began to sense that this wasn't going to be just another interview. The host's questions were getting sharper, and Melania's silence was becoming more pronounced. Every time he tried to push her buttons, she held her ground. The host, perhaps realizing that his usual tactics weren't working, leaned in with a more biting tone. He made another comment about how Melania had been in the public eye for years, but had never fully opened up about her personal feelings or opinions. The audience's curiosity began to grow. What would she do next? Would she crack under the pressure, or was she truly as unflappable as she appeared? There was an unspoken sense that something had to give, that this tension couldn't last much longer. Melania's calmness only made the moment more intense. Viewers could feel the weight of the silence as the host waited for her response, his smug expression growing more evident. Then, there was a shift. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was undeniable. Melania's eyes seemed to narrow just slightly, and for a moment, her lips pressed into a tight line. It was the slightest change, but to anyone paying close attention, it signaled that Melania was no longer going to simply endure the host's questions. She had been patient, composed, and polite for long enough. Something was about to happen, and the tension in the air grew thicker by the second. The host, sensing that the interview was no longer in his control, tried to take it even further. He leaned in closer, pushing harder with another cutting remark. The camera zoomed in, catching every detail of his expression, as well as Melania's unflinching gaze. It was almost like a standoff. He was determined to get a rise out of her, and she was determined to stay calm. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Would she finally lose her composure? Would this be the moment where Melania Trump's patience snapped? It was clear that the stakes were rising. The audience was glued to the screen, waiting for the inevitable explosion. But it didn't come. Instead, what happened next was something no one could have predicted. Melania Trump, with her quiet but powerful presence, was about to deliver a response that would change the entire tone of the interview and leave the host stunned. The suspense was almost unbearable. Everyone was on the edge of their seats, waiting to see how she would turn the tables. And then, without warning, it happened. As the interview continued to intensify, it wasn't just Melania's words that were capturing everyone's attention. It was her body language. The way she carried herself in that moment said more than anything she could have said with her voice. While the TV host was growing more aggressive with each question, trying to push her into a corner, Melania remained calm, her every movement deliberate and controlled. Her posture alone was a statement. She sat tall, shoulders squared, exuding quiet strength. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, not fidgeting, not showing any sign of nervousness. The host, with his pointed questions and sarcastic tone, might have expected her to appear tense, to shift uncomfortably, or even to respond with frustration. But Melania didn't react to the provocation. Instead, she remained still, almost too still, like a person who had mastered the art of remaining composed under pressure. The way she maintained eye contact with the host was telling. Most people, under such a barrage of pointed, rude questions, might look away or avoid direct confrontation with their eyes. But Melania held his gaze, unwavering. It wasn't a challenge or a confrontation, but a quiet power. She wasn't going to let him control a conversation. She wasn't going to show any weakness. Her eyes were calm but focused, as if to say, "I'm in control of this situation." Even her facial expressions were controlled. She didn't allow herself to show any anger or irritation, despite the growing tension. Her face was serene, her lips pressed together in a slight, almost imperceptible smile. It was as though she was in full command of her emotions, not allowing the host's rudeness to disturb her. For anyone watching, it was clear Melania wasn't going to be easily rattled. But there was something else. In her stillness, there was also a quiet tension, a sense that she was just waiting for the right moment to respond. Her silence in the face of the host's provocations wasn't weakness, it was strategy. She understood something the host did not. Sometimes, the greatest power lies in restraint. She was making him do all the talking, all the pushing, while she waited for the perfect opportunity to shut him down. The host, on the other hand, couldn't seem to understand why his tactics weren't working. He leaned forward, speaking more sharply, trying to provoke a reaction. But Melania didn't flinch. With each passing moment, her calmness grew more powerful. It was almost as if she was making him dig his own hole. The more he tried to get under her skin, the more she showed him just how little he could affect her. Her body language was saying everything the host could not comprehend. The tightness in her jaw, the steady look in her eyes, and the stillness of her hands all pointed to one thing. Melania Trump was in complete control of the situation. She wasn't going to allow anyone, not even a rude TV host, to get the better of her. And though it may have looked like she was simply waiting for the moment to pass, those who were paying close attention knew she was quietly preparing for something bigger. In the midst of all the tension, Melania's calmness felt like an emotional anchor. She wasn't backing down, but she wasn't making the scene either. She was waiting. The entire room, the host, the crew, and the viewers at home could sense it. She was letting the host make his move, letting him reveal himself. And when the time came, she would respond in a way that no one would forget. The more the host pushed, the more Melania's body language grew in significance. Every gesture, every look, seemed to show how unshakable she was. It wasn't just her words that would shut him down. It was her presence, her ability to remain calm under fire would soon make her response even more powerful. And that's when it happened. The moment had finally arrived. The interview had reached its breaking point, and the tension was at its peak. The TV host, clearly growing more frustrated, leaned in one last time with another sharp, biting remark. His tone was more condescending, his words loaded with sarcasm. It seemed like he had gone all in, trying to provoke Melania into an emotional outburst or perhaps an argument. He was certain that his tactics would work, that she would slip up and give him the dramatic moment he was looking for. But he couldn't have been more wrong. With the entire room watching, the host fired his final shot. He made a comment that questioned Melania's involvement in important decisions, hinting at her perceived role as nothing more than a silent figure by her husband's side. He even suggested that she should speak out more, as though he was doing her a favor by pushing her to defend herself. It was a direct hit, and it was clear that the host expected some sort of reaction. An angry reply, maybe a defensive outburst, anything that would give him the moment of drama he craved. But Melania didn't flinch. She didn't show any signs of cracking. Instead, she did something that left everyone speechless. In one smooth, deliberate motion, she turned slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough to show she was aware of the weight of his words. And then, in the most calm and collected voice, she delivered a response so sharp and precise that it seemed to cut through the tension like a knife. "You seem to misunderstand the role I've chosen. I'm not here to answer to anyone's expectations. I've been very clear about who I am, and I don't need to prove myself to anyone, especially not you." Her words were simple, but the delivery was everything. There was no anger in her voice, no raised tone, just pure, unshakable confidence. The way she spoke was almost like a quiet storm, strong but measured. The host was caught off guard. For a moment, there was silence. He seemed momentarily stunned, unable to react or continue his line of questioning. His face turned slightly pale as he searched for words, but none came. It was clear that Melania had struck the perfect balance. She had responded without giving in to his provocation, but with just enough power to shut him down. The audience, who had been waiting for something dramatic, was now in awe. The entire room could feel it. Melania Trump had just flipped the entire dynamic of the conversation. She had gone from being the silent, composed figure to a woman who commanded respect. She wasn't going to let anyone push her around, and she wasn't going to let the host or anyone else define who she was. Her response was more than just words. It was a statement, a powerful declaration that no matter how much anyone tried to provoke or challenge her, she was not going to be swayed. The host, who had thought he was in control, was now the one who had been thrown off balance. The shock in the room was palpable. The host sat back, his mouth slightly open as if trying to figure out how to recover from the sudden turn in the conversation. But there was no recovery. Melania had taken control, and the host's smugness had been replaced with a stunned silence. As the camera panned to the audience, you could see the look of disbelief on their faces. Did she really just say that? It was the kind of moment that left people speechless, both in the studio and at home. People were talking about her words long after the interview ended. The world was watching, and what they had just witnessed wasn't just a sharp response. It was a statement of power, confidence, and grace. Melania Trump had turned the tables on the host in the most unexpected way. The interview, which had started with tension and rudeness, had suddenly shifted into a moment of respect. No one had seen this coming. The host, who had expected a vulnerable or defensive Melania, was left reeling. And the viewers, who had been waiting for fireworks, were left with something much more powerful, a lesson in calm, quiet strength. The moment was unforgettable, and the world was still reeling from the shock of what Melania had just done. As the interview ended, the ripples of Melania Trump's unexpected response spread like wildfire. Within moments, the clip of her shutting down the rude TV host was everywhere. Social media exploded, news outlets picked up the story, and people across the country began to weigh in on what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just a moment of television. It was a moment that would become a topic of discussion for days to come. The first wave of reactions came from the people who had been watching the interview live. Many of them were in awe of how calmly Melania had handled the situation. Did she really just do that? Was a common question that popped up in comments and tweets. People were impressed by her ability to stay composed under such intense pressure. Rather than getting caught up in the host's provocations, she had maintained control and turned the tables in the most elegant way possible. On Twitter, hashtags like #MelaniaTrumpShutdown and #MelaniaSaysNoMore began trending within hours. The internet was buzzing with admiration for her strength and poise. It wasn't just the conservative or liberal sides of the spectrum that were talking about it. People from all walks of life were recognizing her ability to stay calm and powerful in the face of adversity. But it wasn't just the general public who had something to say. Public figures and celebrities also took to their social media platforms to share their thoughts. Some praised Melania for her response, calling it a lesson in how to handle rudeness with grace. Others were more critical of the host, saying that he had crossed a line by attempting to bait her into an argument. One popular journalist tweeted, "Melania Trump just showed the world how to respond to a rude question with dignity. Whether you agree with her politics or not, you have to respect that." Of course, not everyone reacted positively. There were some who criticized Melania, questioning whether her response was truly as powerful as it seemed. Some felt that she had simply shut down the host without fully addressing the issue, while others believed her words lacked substance. But even in the face of criticism, one thing was clear: Melania's response had sparked a conversation. News outlets picked up the story, and within hours, the incident was being discussed on talk shows and in the press. Every detail of the exchange was analyzed, with experts offering their opinions on how Melania's reaction had changed the course of the interview. The host, who had once thought he was in control, was now the one who had become the subject of scrutiny. His attempts to provoke her had backfired, and people began questioning whether his behavior was appropriate in the first place. In a way, Melania had turned the tables not just on the host, but on the entire situation. She had managed to take an uncomfortable and potentially damaging situation and turn it into an opportunity to demonstrate her strength and composure. Her calm, yet firm response showed that she wasn't the kind of person who would let anyone define her narrative. The discussion continued to grow, and soon, the story was not just about the interview itself, but about what it meant to respond to rudeness and provocation with such dignity. People began to talk about how Melania's reaction could serve as a model for others who faced similar situations, whether in the public eye or in their personal lives. As the hours turned into days, the clip of her response continued to circulate across the internet. It was shared, reposted, and commented on by millions. Her reaction became a symbol of quiet strength and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful responses are the ones that don't involve shouting or fighting back. Instead, Melania showed the world that sometimes the best way to handle a challenge is to simply stand firm, stay calm, and let your actions speak louder than any words. In the end, Melania Trump's response didn't just leave the TV host in shock. It left America talking. It was a moment that transcended the interview itself, resonating with people far beyond the television set. The world had just witnessed something truly remarkable, and it was a moment that would stick in people's minds for a long time to come. As the interview ended, the ripples of Melania Trump's unexpected response spread like wildfire. Within moments, the clip of her shutting down the rude TV host was everywhere. Social media exploded, news outlets picked up the story, and people across the country began to weigh in on what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just a moment of television. It was a moment that would become a topic of discussion for days to come. The first wave of reactions came from the people who had been watching the interview live. Many of them were in awe of how calmly Melania had handled the situation. Did she really just do that? Was a common question that popped up in comments and tweets. People were impressed by her ability to stay composed under such intense pressure. Rather than getting caught up in the host's provocations, she had maintained control and turned the tables in the most elegant way possible. On Twitter, hashtags like #MelaniaTrumpShutdown and #MelaniaSaysNoMore began trending within hours. The internet was buzzing with admiration for her strength and poise. It wasn't just the conservative or liberal sides of the spectrum that were talking about it. People from all walks of life were recognizing her ability to stay calm and powerful in the face of adversity. But it wasn't just the general public who had something to say. Public figures and celebrities also took to their social media platforms to share their thoughts. Some praised Melania for her response, calling it a lesson in how to handle rudeness with grace. Others were more critical of the host, saying that he had crossed a line by attempting to bait her into an argument. One popular journalist tweeted, "Melania Trump just showed the world how to respond to a rude question with dignity. Whether you agree with her politics or not, you have to respect that." Of course, not everyone reacted positively. There were some who criticized Melania, questioning whether her response was truly as powerful as it seemed. Some felt that she had simply shut down the host without fully addressing the issue, while others believed her words lacked substance. But even in the face of criticism, one thing was clear: Melania's response had sparked a conversation. News outlets picked up the story, and within hours, the incident was being discussed on talk shows and in the press. Every detail of the exchange was analyzed, with experts offering their opinions on how Melania's reaction had changed the course of the interview. The host, who had once thought he was in control, was now the one who had become the subject of scrutiny. His attempts to provoke her had backfired, and people began questioning whether his behavior was appropriate in the first place. In a way, Melania had turned the tables not just on the host, but on the entire situation. She had managed to take an uncomfortable and potentially damaging situation and turn it into an opportunity to demonstrate her strength and composure. Her calm, yet firm response showed that she wasn't the kind of person who would let anyone define her narrative. The discussion continued to grow, and soon, the story was not just about the interview itself, but about what it meant to respond to rudeness and provocation with such dignity. People began to talk about how Melania's reaction could serve as a model for others who faced similar situations, whether in the public eye or in their personal lives. As the hours turned into days, the clip of her response continued to circulate across the internet. It was shared, reposted, and commented on by millions. Her reaction became a symbol of quiet strength and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful responses are the ones that don't involve shouting or fighting back. Instead, Melania showed the world that sometimes the best way to handle a challenge is to simply stand firm, stay calm, and let your actions speak louder than any words. In the end, Melania Trump's response didn't just leave the TV host in shock, it left America talking. It was a moment that transcended the interview itself, resonating with people far beyond the television set. The world had just witnessed something truly remarkable, and it was a moment that would stick in people's minds for a long time to come. As the dust settled, and the reactions to Melania Trump's powerful response continued to flood social media and news outlets, people started to break down the significance of her words and how she handled the situation. Many viewers were still in awe of how she remained calm, poised, and unshaken by the rude TV host. But what made her response truly stand out wasn't just her ability to stay composed. It was the deeper message she conveyed through her actions. The power of composure. Melania Trump's reaction wasn't the kind of dramatic, fiery comeback that many might have expected. Instead, her response was one of quiet power. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lose her cool. But she delivered her message so clearly that it left the host, and everyone watching, stunned. In that brief moment, Melania showed that true strength doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes, it's the ability to stay calm, even when provoked, that has the most impact. By maintaining a level-headed demeanor, Melania flipped the script on what many thought would be an uncomfortable confrontation. The TV host, who was expecting her to crumble or lash out, was taken aback when she turned the situation around in such a graceful but firm way. The way Melania controlled the conversation, even without raising her voice, made it clear that she wasn't going to allow anyone to define her or force her into a corner. A subtle yet powerful assertion of boundaries. Melania's response also highlighted her ability to set boundaries in a respectful yet powerful way. She didn't let the host's rudeness dictate the course of the interview. Instead, she took charge and set the tone for the conversation. Her words, "I don't need to prove myself to anyone, especially not you," were not just a defense of her personal dignity, but a declaration of her boundaries. She didn't need to answer to the host's expectations or anyone else's for that matter. This moment became a masterclass in how to handle intrusive or challenging behavior from others. Instead of getting defensive or apologizing for her silence, Melania asserted her space. She made it clear that just because someone was asking pointed questions, they weren't entitled to a specific answer, especially when those questions were laced with disrespect. Her words acted as a reminder that personal boundaries should be respected, and sometimes the best way to handle someone overstepping those boundaries is to simply not engage in a way they expect. In doing so, Melania reinforced the idea that you don't owe anyone an explanation, especially when their approach is rude or hostile. The silence that speaks volumes. One of the most compelling aspects of Melania's response was the silence she maintained before speaking. The pause before her sharp, deliberate words seemed to hold an immense amount of weight. In a world where people often rush to fill every silence with words, Melania's decision to remain silent, to hold space, and let the host's question hang in the air, made her eventual response all the more powerful. That silence gave her the time and control to choose the perfect words. It was as if she was saying, "I don't need to rush or react impulsively. I have control over how this moment unfolds." In a way, her silence became her strongest weapon. It was a way of signaling that she wasn't intimidated or pressured by the host's attempts to provoke her. A lesson in emotional control. Another layer to Melania's response was the level of emotional control she demonstrated. Throughout the exchange, the host tried to get a rise out of her, attempting to push her buttons with sarcastic and rude remarks. But rather than allowing her emotions to drive the conversation, Melania stayed in control. She didn't let anger or frustration cloud her judgment or alter her composure. This emotional control wasn't just about keeping her cool. It was about choosing not to engage in a battle that was beneath her. Many would have been tempted to fight back with emotion, but Melania's ability to remain calm and rational showed a level of self-discipline and strength that most people would find difficult to replicate. Her emotional intelligence and her understanding of how to respond without reacting was one of the key reasons her response was so impactful. A broader impact, a moment of empowerment. The more people reflected on the exchange, the more they realized that this wasn't just about Melania Trump shutting down a rude TV host. It was a broader lesson in empowerment. Her response became a model for how to handle disrespect in all forms, whether from a person in the public eye, a colleague, or even a family member. For many, it was a reminder that you don't have to shout or argue to assert your power. Sometimes, the most effective way to deal with rudeness is with quiet strength and clear boundaries. By maintaining control and not giving in to provocation, Melania turned what could have been a moment of embarrassment or conflict into one of quiet triumph. As people discussed her response in the days following the interview, they recognized it as an example of how to maintain your dignity and respect in the face of adversity. Melania Trump had not only shut down a rude TV host, but had sent a powerful message that would resonate with anyone who had ever felt the pressure to respond or react in a way that they weren't comfortable with. Her response wasn't just a moment of personal victory. It was a universal lesson in handling life's difficult moments with poise and strength. The message was clear. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. As the interview ended and the media buzz surrounding Melania Trump's calm, assertive response continued to grow, one thing became clear. The impact of that single moment was far-reaching. It wasn't just about a one-time encounter with a rude TV host. It was about a shift in how people began to view Melania, and more importantly, how they thought about handling difficult situations in their own lives. Changing the narrative. Before the interview, Melania was often seen as a figure who kept a low profile, overshadowed by the political drama surrounding her husband. She wasn't known for speaking out often, or for making bold public statements. But after that interview, something changed. People who had only seen her as the silent First Lady now saw her as someone with strength, confidence, and the ability to stand her ground, all without raising her voice or losing her composure. Her response to the rude host showed the world that Melania Trump was more than just a bystander in her own story. She wasn't going to allow anyone to define her, whether through her silence or her actions. In that brief moment, she reclaimed her narrative, turning a potentially humiliating situation into one of empowerment. This subtle yet powerful shift was not only seen in the way the public viewed her, but also in the way the media covered her. No longer was she just the quiet First Lady or the wife of the president. Instead, the narrative surrounding her started to evolve. She was now someone who could handle pressure with grace, who could take on tough situations and come out stronger on the other side. A source of inspiration. For many people, especially women, Melania's response became a symbol of empowerment. Her calm demeanor and unwavering confidence in the face of provocation inspired others to handle their own challenges in a similar way. People began to share the clip of the interview, quoting her words and using her response as motivation in their personal struggles. In workplaces, schools, and even within families, her ability to set boundaries with respect became a lesson that resonated deeply. The idea that you don't need to react emotionally or angrily to every challenge began to take hold. Melania's response proved that there is power in silence, that not every conflict needs to escalate, and that sometimes the best response is simply not to engage with negativity. Many felt that Melania's response gave them permission to stand up for themselves, to assert their own worth without resorting to hostility or confrontation. It was a moment of catharsis for many who had struggled to navigate difficult, disrespectful situations in their own lives. Criticism fades, respect endures. While Melania's response earned her admiration from many, it wasn't without its critics. Some felt that her words were too vague, too indirect, or that she had missed an opportunity to more directly confront the issues at hand. But in the end, these criticisms faded in comparison to the overwhelming support she received. The respect for how she carried herself in such a high-pressure situation was undeniable. Over time, her response became a part of her legacy. It wasn't just a momentary triumph, it was a lasting impression of who she was as a person. Melania Trump's strength wasn't in her words alone. It was in her actions, her presence, and the quiet power she exuded in the face of adversity. A defining moment in history. Looking back on this moment, it's clear that it became a defining moment not just for Melania Trump, but for the way we think about power, respect, and dealing with adversity. While the world had expected drama and confrontation, Melania gave them something far more impactful, a lesson in dignity and emotional control. Her ability to transform an uncomfortable, tense situation into one that showcased her strength and composure left a mark that went beyond the media coverage. It became a story passed down from person to person, one that reminded everyone watching that sometimes the greatest power comes not from what we say, but from how we respond. And so, as the buzz around the interview died down and the media cycle moved on to the next big story, Melania Trump's response remained. It became a moment that people returned to for inspiration when they faced their own challenges, and it continued to shape the way we view powerful women, particularly those in the public eye. In the end, Melania didn't just shut down a rude TV host. She created a legacy of grace, strength, and composure under pressure. Her response would be remembered not just for the way it silenced her critic, but for the way it empowered an entire generation to stand firm, stay true to themselves, and handle even the most difficult situations with poise.